Okay. All right. Going live today. Happy Monday. Let's talk about dysfunctional families and why you got wired for disappointment, shame, guilt. Hey, Lisa. Thanks for tuning in. I'll wait for a couple more people to hop on. But if you guys are new, welcome. Welcome to the group. We're getting close to 5,000 people in the group. And I really appreciate you being here. If you don't know me, I run the group. My name is Tracy Principe, and I run this group. I have a podcast of the same name, Navigating No Contact with Toxic Parents. Check out that podcast. Follow me on Instagram, and wherever you listen to podcasts, my podcast is on there. So check that out. Sometimes I go live in the group and talk about things. So if you turn your notifications on in the group so you know when I go live, so that there's more than one person on or nobody on, because nobody's knowing that I go live. Once a month I do a drop-in class in this group. It's only $25. It's on usually self-regulation, self-soothing, somatic nervous system practices. So the next one is August 19th, 2 p.m. Pacific time. It's going to be on internal family systems, inner child parts work, but it's not like inner child. It's probably like, and it's somatic too. So it's not going to be like a typical inner child. It's going to be pretty fun. So that's held over Zoom. So it's not in the group, it's on Zoom. And, you get to, we do a lot of feedback and answer questions. It's a nice way to connect with others if you're comfortable being in a group Zoom environment. Not everybody is, but if you are, be sure to sign up for that so that you can get the Zoom link and get a spot for that, okay? Next one's August 19th. So I do that monthly as a way to kind of introduce you to this work. So if you don't know, I do somatic experiencing, brain spotting, and internal family systems, somatic internal family systems. So based on the approach here is the work that we do, that I do and teach, is that trauma is stored in the body. Okay, so if that's a new concept to you, trauma is stored in the body. This is what, this is where therapy is heading. Is that, trauma gets stored in the body, so we need to take a body-based approach to healing it, not just a cognitive talking approach. So that's why, somatic experiencing, EMDR, brain spotting, there's a lot of other somatic touch-based therapies, any combination of those. This is the direction that we're heading. So, talk therapy alone just isn't going to get to that stored trauma. And how do we know this? Because our nervous system lets us know fight, flight, freeze, and what's happening in our body. Body breaks down, we get autoimmune, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, IBS, right? All of that affects the body, stress, that chronic stress, dysregulation, right? So if that's new to you, there's some great books. One of them is called The Body Keeps the Score. If you haven't heard of that or read that, I invite you to, check that out on Amazon, The Body Keeps the Score. And also Peter Levine, who's the founder of Somatic Experiencing, has a book called Waking the Tiger, and he talks about how he found somatic experiencing through the nervous system of mammals, that we're all mammals. Only ours gets stuck and we suppress that trauma. It's pretty fascinating if you like that stuff. If you've heard of polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve, the largest nerve of our nervous system. If you like reading about stuff like that, check out Stephen Porges, who figured that out. So all of that is really great. This is the direction that we're going. We'll continue to go in and learn more about the brain and how trauma is stored So that's pretty good. That's pretty cool because, we get better healing, right? I certainly wish I had known about this a lot sooner. That's for sure. So, all right. So today I want to talk about dysfunctional family dynamics. And hey, Sherry, say hi if you hop on. Questions as we go along. I'm happy to answer questions, so feel free to do that at any time. So here's the thing about dysfunctional families and why you're feeling the way that you do is you got wired for it. So when you experience trauma, your brain wires differently than somebody else who didn't experience that, right? So we got wired for shame. We got wired for guilt. We got wired for disappointment. We got wired for I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I don't matter. All of those things because we didn't hear it one time. We heard it hundreds of times, right? One thing on top of the other over, an extended period of time, our whole childhood, and then maybe it's still happening in adulthood. That is why I advocate for no contact, especially for those of you who have these parents that don't let up, they just don't stop, right? Which is like a lot of you. Now, my mom isn't like that, but all of those parents that just don't stop, right? That's why no contact is so important, and especially for those of you that really have that again, you are wired for codependency, you're wired for parentification. You're wired for enmeshment, right? You got wired for all of that. So and it's very, very hard to break. That is why really the only way to break it is by going no contact. Otherwise it's difficult to break out of that. So let's talk about the type of dysfunctional family dynamics that you may have experienced, okay? And then at any point, just type of question. Hopefully I can see those questions. Hold on, let me go, because sometimes it doesn't work. The questions don't show up on my phone, and I think I have to plug my phone in. Hold on a second. The battery's I want the battery to die. Okay, there. Is that gonna work? All right. So, okay. All right, there we go. Hopefully that'll work. So so let's go back to dysfunctional families. Hold that thought. I'll answer that question in a second. So dysfunctional family dynamics. Okay, so here's some things. Let me know if you experience chronic conflict, right? So that's when everybody's arguing, right? Everybody's arguing, and it harmful, and everybody just lets those wounds fester, and this is why complex trauma is so complex, right? Because it's not just this thing that happened, it's like multiple layers of things that happened, right? So everybody's arguing, but then nobody's, resolving anything, right? So that adds to the confusion. And then so that prolonged conflict can really damage your neurobiology, your neurochemistry, and the way you're wired, right? So an insecurity, right? And the loss of that child, as a child, your primary attachment, right, is with your parents. So even if your parents are monsters, you still want to love them and attach, because that is a primary need. And that's why, yes, of course you want to love your parents. Of course you want, that is a primary core need. So it's against, our nature, our inherent nature as mammals, to move away from that, right? That is not normal. The problem is that, we don't have normal parents, families, right? The other type of dysfunctional household dynamic is households that have a parent with severe mental or psychological issues, mental health disorders, and most likely they're not diagnosed, right? Or sometimes they might be diagnosed, but they are impaired because of a mental or a personality disorder, right? And there's many personality disorders. There's not just narcissistic personality. There's a lot of personality disorders, right? So you could have that, and they could have, dual diagnoses, right, of several, things going on if they have that. Or they could have a substance abuse, drugs, alcohol, or even a process addiction like gambling or something else that, could be detrimental to a household, right? So the problem with these households of addiction or mental illness, or they could be mental illness that goes hand in hand, so they could have both. The problem with that is that the children are thrown into the role of a parent, right? And so that makes things, the roles are reversed, right? So the children become responsible for the parents, and then maybe even taking care of younger siblings, right? And so the child is placed in the adult role and maybe taking, cleaning or maybe even cooking or taking care of siblings because the parents are not capable of that, right? So there's that. Then then there's just the chaotic household. And again, these all overlap, right? They all overlap and intertwine. So this is the parents that were not present. They were busy. They were, there was no rules, and there was, no consistency, right? Something was going on. It was chaos. And chaos could be, so there's chaos that's obvious, and then there's chaos that's less obvious. So for people like me that experienced, my mom, she had a look that was chaos because I never knew, and she didn't say much. She was more silent, a lot of silent treatment and a lot of looks, very cold, silent. That was chaos internally for me because I never knew what to expect, right? Even though there wasn't fighting, there wasn't arguing, I didn't grow up with any of that. There was a silent chaos, right? So that is also trauma, and that can be very damaging and harmful. So there could be that covert, right? So just to, keep that out there. So that inconsistency, again, and that's more neglect, right? So I had my mom's very extreme neglect, right? So that can also be chaotic and extremely traumatizing, and no less damaging, right? So then another one is the dominant submissive household. That would be like what a lot of you all have is one parent that dominates and the other one's more submissive or enabling, right? Sometimes, and again, that could be mom's more dominating, dad's submissive, or the other way around. So there's that dictator, authoritative parent, with absolutely no consideration for feelings or different opinions of the other family members, right? And then the other partner will usually be depressed, negative, very negative, right? So one parent is strict and controlling, the other one is soft and passive, right? Who had that? But but all of them are really unhappy, okay? So it doesn't, it's like they're all unhappy, and it's not, that is not a healthy relationship, right? And I know a lot of y'all realize that later, because in childhood, again, you see your parents, and there's always one parent has to be safe at least. So it looks like dad's safer maybe than mom, because he, maybe he does provide, something, right? But then later in adulthood, you're like, wait a minute, no, he was just passive going along with this, or the other way around. Your mom didn't protect you from your dad, right? And so sometimes when we wake up to that realization, we can get really angry, and that makes a lot of sense. That's okay. That's valid, right? So everybody's unhappy, but that passively obedient, and then the dominant parent, long-term severe negative consequences from that, right? As that parent tries to control everyone, and your needs are never considered. Here's the thing, your needs in any of this were never considered. I mean, I'm talking like, yes, you had food and you had clothes, if you, assuming, of course, if you didn't, that's also another trauma. But assuming that you had your basic needs taken care of. Hey, Wilson, but nobody considered your emotional needs, right? Nobody considered anything else beyond that. And everything else was like a punishment, okay? And then the emotionally distant family. That's, they don't know how to show love or affection. They show little warmth towards each other. So, and that was my mom. Cold. So you learned, and these are the families that didn't talk or communicate too, right? So maybe a lot of silence, or maybe maybe they did use silent treatment as a punishment. So you learned that your feelings should be repressed, that there wasn't anybody in all of these situations. Again, you learned that feelings needed to not be shown, either, again, verbally or non-verbally. You got the cue, and that you just keep it to yourself, because even the parents seemed to be not able to communicate, right? Nobody was able to communicate, and it was, they looked uncomfortable even, and there would have been no attachment, right? So attachment would have been non-existent. So when you have these the neglect, emotionally distant, that is where the attachment wounds get born, and that wasn't there. So you can assume that emotionally distant mother with a crying baby was just like, like no attachment, right? No attachment. And I believe that's where, if you want to call it borderline personality disorder, comes from. I would say that it comes from extreme neglect. Extreme neglect and a big attachment wound. That's what I think. So again, that emotionally neglectful family, distant family, that's the least obvious dysfunctional family setup, right? And again, I didn't even know I had trauma. I had no idea that, that was how bad that was. So that's really the invisible trauma, right? In fact, I didn't even ever connect the trauma until I looked at my own life, because there wasn't anything really to look at. There wasn't, so that emotional neglect is extremely invisible and hard to identify. The way I finally identified it was actually looking at my own life to say, wait a minute, I couldn't be an alcoholic, have an eating drug addict, all that. You know, and then I connected the dots, right? So, all right, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Hold on, my little thing. Somebody said earlier, how is brain spotting different than EMDR? I don't know if you're still here, Lisa. So brain spotting uses a pointer. So we have a pointer. Can you guys see that? We use a pointer and we focus on the end of the pointer, and then I do some recalling and activation, right? So kind of like EMDR, you could think of so the setup would be something that's a little activating. When I say activating, I mean triggering. And then we focus on the tip of the pointer and it go across your field of vision, which is really fascinating because as you go from the right and the middle, the left, the activation will change, and then we process it. And I do also use bilateral stimulation. That's from EMDR, so I will use that sometimes. And it's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm digging it. I'm loving it. So I'm still training. There's like different levels of that. So, like with everything, somatic is level 1, 2, and 3. Brain spotting, there's 1, 2, 3. Internal family systems, I think it's 1, it's like years and levels. So, but it's pretty cool. I like it. I like EMDR too. They different, things I like about brain spotting to me seems less intense than EMDR, and it uses more somatic, I think, with where you feel it in your body. So it's pretty cool. Hi, Ada. All right. So common signs of dysfunctional families. Okay, lack of empathy, clearly. Lack of respect of no boundaries, right? And that's usually towards all, again, mom and dad don't have any boundaries with each other, don't have any boundaries with anybody in the family, right? All of that. And that could be, borrowing or destroying personal items, barging in, reading a journal, things like that. Barging into the bathroom or just anything like that without no consent, right? No consent. Those really big boundary violations, invading that personal space and privacy, or maybe everybody was in a household and nobody had their space or their privacy. It starts to feel like a trapped feeling, right? So extreme conflict, hostility in the family environment, verbal, physical abuse also between parent, child, siblings, right? And then nobody's really, rules or whatever's going on is authoritarian, obey this, but there's no real chance for even siblings to have any autonomy or individual, hey, you like math and so likes this, or, everybody's pitted against each other, right? Which is really unfortunate because it really isn't your fault that you don't have a relationship with a sibling. You guys, y'all got set up. You got set up for failure, right? And then again, that role reversal, and where children are put in roles of the parent, restricting friendships and relationships, with outsiders. If that happened, usually, family isolation, and you see that in partnerships too, right? With a partner, they restrict, usually because they have secrets, and again, they want to keep you controlled. They don't want you to talk to other people, right? So not, some of this is like cult-like, it's cultish, right? And secrecy, denial, rigid rules, right? And religion could certainly be in there as well if you experience that. And then here's the big one: perfectionism and unrealistic expectations on their children. So those skills, abilities, and development are just, and I see this a lot, where, you know, there's so much pressure on a child's developing brain and body to, you know, perform. And then that goes into adulthood, and that's when the body really crashes and starts to break down, right, with that burnout. So that pressure to perform at school and sports and academics, and again, there's no room for feeling or getting in touch with yourself, right? Extremely damaging, really is. And then, of course, emotional verbal abuse, ridiculing behavior, criticizing, blaming each family, you know, blaming, or not even so much each family member. If there's a scapegoat, the scapegoat always takes the blame, always, right? And then that, you know, that suppressed speech and emotion, so not allowing children to have their own opinions, and maybe not even accepting sadness or even happiness as an emotion, right? So not being able to express yourself. Remember, children are very curious, inquisitive. By nature, children want to express, ask questions, you know, they're exploring the world, and they get shut down, and then they learn that's not okay to do that, right? That is sad, really sad. Using children as weapons against each other, right? Weaponizing siblings against each other. And then, of course, conditional love, right? Everything is conditional. That's, you know, that is very damaging. So, of course, all families have some level of dysfunction. That's normal. How, you know, nobody can be perfect all the time. You know, the problem is this goes beyond that, right? So I would venture to say that everybody in this group goes way beyond just, you know, that kind of thing. So the problem again is looking at your own behaviors, and connecting that back to your family of origin, right? So this is where some people don't connect the dots, and this is what I help clients too, is connecting those dots back to the family of origin. It's not to blame your parents, but, you know, it's to understand, and so that we can heal this, you know, this complex trauma, right? That our family, and this intergenerational trauma that just got passed down. So the symptoms that, you know, that you're going to have, the big one that, you know, is that unworthiness, that low self-esteem, right? And so that word, you know, I would say that's number one. I would say that's the top one, that you know, I'm not good enough, right? I'm not good enough, and I'm just going to try to do everything I can to be good enough and feel okay, right? Feel normal. That's, for me, I want to feel normal. I want to feel okay. How do I do that? I go to work, and I stay busy, and I do all these things, and at work I do really good, and somebody praises me, and I get a raise, and, you know, but my personal well-being and that hole just never got filled. So low self-esteem, that unworthiness, that's number one, I would say. And then other symptoms are authority, uneasy around authority figures, right? So feeling like you're, you know, going to get criticized, isolated feelings, need for approval, right? Need for approval, that's a big one. Overly sensitive, anxious, feeling intimidated by, like confrontation, judgment, anything like that's going to feel like death, right? Really, really scary. And then, of course, the compulsion to seek out other dysfunctional people because that's what's familiar. We don't do that on purpose. It's because that is familiar. So we tend to go with what's familiar because that was safe, okay? Safe, quote unquote, because our nervous system says that's safe. This healthy person over here, that's not really safe because we never felt that. So we got wired ass backwards, if you want to say that. We did. We got wired, and that was me. Dysfunctional relationships, healthy people, no, not so much. So that's what happens. We gravitate towards what is familiar, and for us, it's dysfunction, right? So we're attracted, if you want to call it that. I don't really like that word, but people that, or we distrust, we mistrust ourselves, and then we're like, this person's too nice. Is that really, so it's like that kind of thing, right? So, and so we might even find people that are, abusive, or they might just be emotionally detached, right? They're not going to be emotionally available. Okay, so that's really, really common, even if they're not like they're just not emotionally available. So, and of course, addictions, any kind of addictions, that's a big one. Guilt, right? Because you're always over caring for somebody else. You had to worry about your parents, so this guilt, and they told you, oh, well, you should be doing this and that, and why aren't you? And they're still doing that. So that guilt has been wired in you, but it's not healthy, normal guilt. It's codependent guilt, right? Difficulty expressing your own feelings and emotions. That's very difficult. And even feeling, like what is all that is the biggest part of this work, to go back and feel all that and give yourself what you didn't have, that nurturing and self-protection and safety, right? So because that was all denied, it was denied, so you probably just stay busy, stay in your head, those, responses to trauma, because your body's not a safe place to be. Feeling wasn't safe, and that makes a lot of sense to your nervous system. Irrational fear of rejection, abandonment, that's really big, right? And you might stay in an unhealthy relationship, unhealthy job. I see that a lot too. So again, unhealthy jobs, unhealthy relationships, unhealthy friendships. It's going to be in pretty much every corner of your life. So a lot of times when I work with clients, they break up with their family, they get, the job thing, they kind of wake up and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, my job is kind of toxic too. And wait a minute, my friendships are toxic too. And so there's even more changes that they make that, that they realize that have been going on a long time, right? So really looking at all of those areas of your life, and partnerships too. So misplaced guilt, right? Difficulties in intimate relationships, lack of trust in others. Setting boundaries is really hard because, again, it wasn't safe to set a boundary. So boundaries, that people-pleasing and fawning, that's a survival response. It wasn't safe to speak up for yourself. And so setting boundaries can feel like you're going to die, right? Like you're going to get punished. That's what most people tell me, is they feel like they're going to get punished. Because again, that nervous system, your system is remembering that from the past and saying, oh, wait a minute, this isn't safe to do that. Procrastination, perfectionism, difficulty in following tasks from beginning to end, or that strong need to be in control of things, impulsivity, right? So all of that. because again, you were, the good child, the hero, the peacekeeper, and then maybe, at some point the rebellious one, the problem child, the scapegoat, the black sheep, blamed for all the dysfunction in the family, the lost child, the inconspicuous, quiet one who was mostly ignored, and then the golden child, the golden child is the one that can do no wrong, the one that attention gets diverted away from the family dysfunction. Oh, the one that's put on the pedestal, right? And so, all of those elements, that's why it makes it so complex and so layered. And when we have these realizations, as we peel back the layers, another layer tends to come up, and then we have like all of these, like, oh my gosh, and you just start to get more and more clarity. But that's how we heal. That's how we heal. So, the good news is again, the nervous system, the somatic work to process that trauma. You're processing what happened to you through your body, right? Because it got suppressed. And then, really seeing things so clearly, right? You tell yourself that you don't have any maternal instinct. Could it be because of, possibly, yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible if you don't have, and again, depending, if you had the mother, depending how your mother was she maternal? And again, this is intergenerational trauma gets really, passed down. So, taking a look at your mom, her mom, if you knew their relationship, can be helpful when we see that line of trauma being passed down. It can be helpful to see that, right? So my mom didn't have a relationship with her mom, and now I'm thinking that it most likely my grandmother didn't have a relationship with her mother because her mother had 10 kids. I don't think she would have been available for a relationship, and so my grandmother's father died. He was 27 years old. He fell off a horse and buggy, right? A horse and wagon back in the, what do you call that? Little House on the Prairie. Right? He fell off of that and he broke his neck and died at 27. I think my grandma was like 4, right? So at 27, he had, there was like a lot of kids, right? And then, so my grandmother's mother, the only option she had with all these kids and a dead husband was to go get married again. And that's what she did. And then this guy had a bunch of kids too. So, there was no birth control, right? So everybody just had a bunch of kids. And so I don't think I don't think she was available, right? So sometimes, that's an intergenerational trauma if we know, or we could find out some of this stuff. So a lot of this stuff I found out, and then, if you have the parents that don't talk about this, I actually found a lot of it on Ancestrycom that was very helpful in finding documents and death certificates and things it's amazing what's on there. That was really helping. It actually helped me greatly to piece things together. Now, I don't recommend doing it if you are not in a healthy state, because that's, if you actually do the DNA, you could find siblings, you could find surprises for sure. And so I don't recommend that, doing that, but I believe if you go on there, there's documents and different things that you can find. It could be helpful in piecing together and making sense of some of the family of origin stuff, especially if we have parents that, they don't talk about stuff, right? Which I always thought was weird. Because if you had a normal family, you'd want to talk about them, right? But my mom never did that. So, Yeah, so things like that could be helpful. Did I answer your question okay, Marcia? And again, certainly if you're in survival mode, which we are, okay, if you come from trauma, everybody in the world, I feel like we're in survival mode anyway. And then if you had trauma, you're definitely in survival mode. It can feel like there's not much room to be nurturing towards yourself, to thinking about having children. I was a single parent. I didn't, again, because of the trauma, bad relationship, no help from the father, left with a baby, no education, all these hard, things, really hard things, total survival mode. It was really hard. It wasn't enjoyable because I could never slow down and enjoy it. So, so I decided after I was never having another kid, and I never did. It just seemed so unbearable, and it's so stressful and too much. But I think, that if I had come from a different family and a nurturing parent, I'm sure it would have been a totally different experience for me, right? Does that make sense? So, yeah. So absolutely, that can be intergenerational as well. My grandmother grew up in the Depression, so I'm sure that wasn't easy for her to be a mother, or she only had one child, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure what happened there, but definitely, those things matter a lot. Absolutely. So again, thinking, did your grandparents, because they grew up in the Depression, or maybe they were in the Holocaust, or some other, culture, something like that. That's a lot of intergenerational trauma, a lot of trauma, right? So all of that plays a part. So thinking about that as well, if you know anything about that, or if you do have a family member that you can ask, get curious about it. I personally find it fascinating. I like to know these things because it helps me kind of piece together, well, maybe that makes sense, right? And it helps me make sense of, why my mom is the way she is, right? Especially since they're not very forthcoming, right? And not very truthful about a lot of that. So, do you have any other questions about that? What else did I want to say here? So really, a lot of this, again, there's so much to get through, right? There's so much to, there's so many layers and things that we have to come to terms with. And it is, some people tell me that, they're like, oh my God, I have to do all this work to undo everything and relearn everything. And yes, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that because, and because we do, that's what we essentially have to do. And I don't know of another way to do it, right? So, it's like, well, we went through all this trauma, and we went through all this, and now we have to go and we have to get therapy, and we have to do whatever we have to, or we have to, we got to do all these things for our bodies, and yeah, and we're the only ones that are going to break that cycle, right? We're the only ones that are going to break that cycle, and that's the way it gets broken. So yes, this is a lot of work. Trauma healing, it's a lot of work. It's lifelong work. It never stops. But the good news is that with this, the all of these new modalities that are coming out, that are body focused, it is worth it. Yeah, it is worth it. It's definitely worth it. And with EMDR and brain spotting and somatic work, I think it's great because we're, we're learning so much about the brain and the nervous system and the body and how it stores trauma that yes, there is, there's a way that we can get to a point where, the trauma is always going to be there. And our brains got wired differently, but, we can come to a place of having trust in ourselves, having peace, right? Internal, and this is all internal. That peace and freedom internally and the trust, I wouldn't trade that and I wouldn't go back to that life that I had that was just grinding and pushing and going and perfecting and doing all these things. And I was like, who the hell was I doing that for? Who the hell was I doing that for? The company I worked for, my mom, to acknowledge all these things that I was doing. She never once acknowledged any of it, right? Trying to get love from having lots of boyfriends and, no, none of that worked out, right? So it was all that seeking and externalizing, which a lot of us do. Somebody love me, somebody, how can I feel normal? And it's all an inside job. It's internal. So yeah, my life looks a lot different, but yeah, I got that peace and freedom, and that hole isn't, I no longer have that desire to go out and prove something to somebody, and certainly not my mother. That's for damn sure, right? So that is, I have no desire for that. And like I said the other day in that post, I don't have those triggers. I just don't have those triggers, which is huge because that consumed a lot of me. Those triggers consumed pretty much every area of my life, and that just doesn't happen anymore. So I'll take that. It's worth it. Absolutely. Right? So if you guys are new, there's a lot of hope, but you do got to work at it, and it's not easy. And again, it takes a lot. So, but there's definitely hope, right? Depression, anxiety, PTSD, CPTSD, a lot of that can be greatly reduced or reversed. Autoimmune, greatly reduced. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of things, and it's really a matter of finding something that works for you, right? But knowing about these body-based modalities is really the way to go. Because again, the talk therapy and the cognitive approaches, it can be helpful, but it doesn't get to that part of the brain that stores trauma. It works, on your, up over here, on this part of the brain, right? All right, so last thing, Thursday, the 19th, not this Thursday, but the following Thursday, monthly drop-in class. If you haven't joined one yet, I recommend that you join. They're only $25. Self-regulation tools, they're awesome. You can, join in on as many as you want. We do it over Zoom, so there's a lot of feedback. If you want to talk, you can and share. We do it together. I really enjoy doing that, and it's a great way to get introduced to this work and see if you like it. And see if it might be something you want to do, and if you like the group thing, it's just a nice way to connect and co-regulate over Zoom. That's great. I'm so glad that, I'm so glad this helps. So if you can join on Thursday, there's a posting about that in announcements. For the 19th, 2 p.m. Pacific, it will also be recorded. So if you can't make it live, you'll get the recording. $25 for a solid hour of some self-regulation. We're going to do inner child on Thursday. Again, it's going to be somatic though, so it's going to be different. If you've done inner child work before, this is going to be different. So I hope you can join us. I'd love to see you there, 19th, all right? And if you have any questions, just PM me. Okay, guys, have a good rest of your day.